Welcome to the It's Our Life's Work podcast, brought to you by Opus Vitae Construction here in Portland, Oregon.
All right, welcome to episode number 9 of the It's Our Life's Work podcast. We are joined with our good friend Bryan Montano, who is an architect here in Portland, Oregon. We do a lot of projects with him and generally like him. Which I know Paul finds that funny because sometimes we don't treat him that way.
I'm really sorry to hear that the podcast has been flopping. That's the only reason that I'm probably back for a third time of this.
But we do really love him as a person, believe it or not. So this episode is going to be about building biology. And we decided that it was important, Paul and I decided that it was important to do this episode because we throw around that term a little bit around the office and stuff and to our clients, but we realize that most people don't know what building biology is. And if you just take the words and what they mean to most people, they're like, huh? Like, how do those two work together? And so we brought you on as the state expert in building biology, and that you're going to know like the history, who started it, their blood type, like the whole thing.
Everything's memorized.
Yeah. Okay, great. And in this training, the building biology training, I also went through and am certified. And as I recall, sort of in the back of my mind, I think you were there when I was doing my last training.
I had to pull a lot of strings to get your certification through, so I was definitely there.
Thank you, Bryan. I appreciate that.
He was grading your paper?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how you passed.
He did not like it either.
Oh, man.
Some angry confrontations
Good.
after some of those exams.
But building biology is like, I guess, BBI. What does that even stand for? Building Biology Institute, right? Yeah. And so they're kind of the governing body for what this practice is and the study and stuff. So if you want to sort of tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so that's the organization in the U.S. that has started based off of a German organization, Bau Biologie, which is the original one. And they are the ones that control the certification processes and teach the seminars and the courses. But building biology as a idea and as a concept, which is what they're teaching and promoting through their different workshops and classes, is this way of approaching design and building that is very much centered around human and occupant specifically health. And that's one of the things that I found it to be different, at least at the time, and I think still is from a lot of the other certification and organizations that are out there, and is what I think really makes it important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I took away from some of the teachings was just the fact that it's like building science goes so far and is great, but we also have to be looking at the biology side and the health of the occupants. And you can't have one without the other, and you can't wholly focus on one and not focus on the other, right? If you focused wholly on, like the natural environment in which we live, then we'd be living in a cave. Mm-hmm. And the cave doesn't have windows or mechanical ventilation or sunlight coming through, right? And so that's not ideal, but somewhere in the middle is. And I like what building science gets us so far, building biology takes us the rest of the way, and you sort of combine the two and end up kind of like with the Reese's peanut butter cup, the chocolate and the peanut butter.
Is that the perfect candy in your mind?
Well, it's delicious. I'm not going to say it's not, but it is. But you take the chocolate and the peanut butter and you put it together and you end up with the perfect cup. But just the peanut butter is okay and just the chocolate's okay, but together they're special.
I don't know about that specific analogy. I think I understand what you're trying to go for.
Well, what would your analogy be? Not a Reese's peanut butter.
Another
it has to be something.
Are we endorsed by Reese's, by the way?
We are not endorsed by anybody.
But we might be after this.
Exactly.
We're certainly going to lose our sponsorship from Twix, unfortunately. Well, one I would say is like, yes, the Building Biology Institute is in a way pushing back on elements of building science while still being very much founded in building science. And what I mean by that is that there can be an approach that is completely technologically driven, energy efficiency driven, where the desire for human health actually gets lost in that process. And that's where I feel like the Building Biology Institute was starting to, and not just them, but buildings that are making us sick that are also, sustainable. Like that's not good. Like that doesn't help us. And then they ended up not being sustainable, right? Because they all got torn down. So like also like doubly bad. Where is what we're trying to do through Building Biology principles is reflect back on like, how does nature work? How do we create a harmonic balance within the built environment with natural materials, and recognizing what is healthy and comfortable for humans, and then using other means through mechanical or technological just advances that we've created over the last thousands of years to just improve upon specific instances of that, but always falling back on, the precautionary principle, which is very much ingrained in their mindset, whereas we are using things that are proven. When we encounter something new, we are open to it, but skeptical, and we approach it with caution, because we're not just going to take the new thing that is out there, throw it at all the buildings, and then figure out 10 years later that everyone's sick from it, which is how, as a society, we tend to approach things, unfortunately. And they would say, like, we've been building healthy buildings, in all parts of the world. Cultures have devised ways of working in their environments, their culture, time and place. And we can continue that process and build really great structures that we know will work. And when we institute new things, we're just careful about how we do it so that we don't create more problems than we've tried to solve.
And what page was that in the book?
192. It's
paragraph.
It's not actually a paragraph. It's a chart on the side.
Okay.
But
Okay.
It's,
Great.
the last version had it that way.
Yeah. So fact checkers, please look that up. Thank you.
One thing that I have to it's maybe a rough transition in a sense. You're an architect, licensed architect. Were you taught this stuff in school?
We were taught, elements of it for sure.
Yeah.
The importance of natural light and natural ventilation were all things that we were discussing, but it did eventually get lost in, architecture school is a wonderful and complicated thing in so many ways, because the amount that you would need to learn, it's like in a lot of professions, like you can't possibly learn it all in 4 years. And so the schools, I don't want to get too caught up in that, but like we did absolutely learn principles of this while also not, I think, focusing them on enough and getting lost in how the pursuit of design as a sort of highfalutin and just very artistic and endeavor doesn't have to be incompatible with all these things. Like where architecture becomes divorced from people, which I disagree with, and unfortunately within modernism there's that strain of it. I think we can make buildings that are beautiful. There's a certain aspect of style and that's preference driven, and people can have their thoughts about that. There's also things that I think there's universal qualities that make spaces appealing to and beautiful from a design perspective. But within all of those, if we're building for people, then people need to be taken into account. And I wish there was more of a focus on that, which building biology absolutely does. Yeah. And at the same time, you can make an ugly building that's healthy, that has this other unhealthy aspect to it, because we are attracted to, like, when you're in a space that really resonates with you and fits your lifestyle and what you're trying to accomplish in that space, it has a power to it that is not, you can't quantify that. But it is still real. And so there's elements of that were important pursuits within design school that if there's anything I would want to get out of design school, it would be knowing how to design and then learning all the other stuff afterwards if I had to make that choice. So
it's not a given within your part of the building industry that anyone who is an architect that someone comes across is going to be thinking about building science or building biology as part of how they're addressing the structure.
No, I mean, in the same way that if you are someone that's interested in elements of like Eastern medicine practices, it's no guarantee that just someone who's a doctor here will have any knowledge of it or even look at it in any respect that is accepting that as a legitimate form of knowledge that can be used for healing. And the same way in architecture, most architects won't have heard of this. Is a relatively small institute, but even within like outside of the institute itself, just these principles of like building to human health and the building science principles that underlie that, I don't think is common within the architecture community, and that is, I mean, a failure somewhere along the way. I don't. In the same, a lot of our systems, like the medical system, is an obvious analogy for me, and people are more familiar with it because not everyone hires an architect, but almost everyone is going to doctors or medical professionals of some kind, and so they have that experience. And in the same way, you're picking your doctor in some. I mean, hopefully these are professionals that you're going to listen to their advice, but you're still vetting them in the process, and you want someone that you resonate with, that has an approach that you are ultimately in agreement with. And if you approach building the same way, you will find that not all architects are in that same place.
So, Bryan, you mistakenly said something really profound.
This is a common theme.
So
in the way we talk to each other.
No, but when you said that, like, when you're sick, you go to a doctor, but not everybody goes to an architect. And isn't that kind of wrong? Right?
It's yes. I would let, yes. I don't know. It's just, all of this is so expensive. Healthcare is expensive. Like, building is expensive. That's where we keep running into this problem. I wish everyone, anything that we're doing, ideally, if you can consult someone who's an expert at it, that would be better, right? Like,
right. But you know, like the guest we had on earlier, Christoph, referred to the built environment as part of our healthcare, because it is. And if that's true, and I believe it to be true, then shouldn't we be equally as concerned about our external healthcare going to a doctor, a licensed professional, then we should also be equally as concerned about going to a licensed architect to create that built environment that is part of our healthcare.
yes, although I would say in the same way, it's not the architect designation that gets you a healthy building, in the same way that it's not just because someone went through medical school, it doesn't mean they're going to be the best person for your health.
No, for sure not.
But within that, yes, like I really love what Christoph said about treating the built environment, because we spend the majority of our time, and increasingly more so within the built environment, we are then therefore taking in whatever that built environment has to give us, whether it's healthy or unhealthy for us. And if it is unhealthy, it's going to be a huge contributor to all sorts of different ailments. And increasingly so, like we're having more contact and reaching out to like naturopaths, for instance, and having conversations with them about, like, we're approaching this on two different sides. How do we work together? Like, how do I make sure the spaces are ultimately what you're, recommending to your clients? Like, and I find that to be amazing, that I've heard naturopaths, like, their prescription is you have to move. Like,
Right.
You're unhealthy. We can do all of these tests and spend thousands of dollars to try to figure out exactly what it is. But we've looked at the timeline. All of the, like, your headaches and this rash that you have, and they all started around the same time, and it was 5 weeks after you moved into that new house that you just built. Like, that, something in there is the problem, and you have to leave it. That's insane, one, because there's so much in terms of resource and time and energy that went into building that thing that they probably did for themselves, in part for their health, and didn't know that there was all this toxic stuff involved.
Right.
And then now they're being told to move. And so I want to be involved in that process. Well, if someone's going to have to move, whether it's renovating it or building something new, how do we make it so that we're not repeating that mistake again? Like, what are the things that we have to do from the built environment side to not have this problem be perpetuated so that naturopaths can then be focused on things that are outside of the control of what humans are creating, because there's always going to be other things that make us sick and that we have to deal with. But the fact that we're so involved with hurting ourselves in ways that are so hard to, I mean, even if you can trace the timeline back to like, yes, this symptom occurred roughly after you moved, to know exactly what it was, like what chemical in the house was it? Or was it the fact that you don't have a good ventilation system, or like, I mean, because there's so many factors and there's so many things that combine to create a mix of complexity that is just impossible to decipher between. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter if you just get to like, we know this isn't good for us. We know things that are. How do we get back to that place?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because when we're sick, we think to go to the doctor almost right away. When it comes to getting sick, we don't think about the possibility that it could be in part because of our house or the environment we're living in, even though we're there a lot of the time. In fact, when even in some of the podcasts I've listened to with Christoph, they've had people who are directly confronted by a naturopath, for example, saying, I think it's your house that's contributing to your lack of health. And people find that very, very implausible to believe.
I think because how expensive like this isn't just, purchase some pills every month.
Right.
You're going to have a lot of pushback just because that person instinctually is going to know, like, this is going to be a huge amount of money. It's going to be a huge time and like just endeavor you're asking me. Like, it's not easy to move.
Mm-hmm. So is money more important than your health?
No, I'm not advocating it, but I'm explaining why I think it exists.
Mm-hmm. I know, but I think that's where the paradigm shift has to happen, is that we have to stop prioritizing money over health, because that's ultimately what this is. Or to look at our healthcare as more of a long-term journey that starts with a healthy base of our home and then kind of works outward from there, right? Then you add in exercise, then you add in, high quality diet, high quality food.
Sleep, no stress, good food, and live in a
Bingo.
non-toxic home. Like, you'll get a lot of the way there. And then relationships, right? Mm-hmm. Family, friends, partners, whatever it is, like, people are social. And these are not, I don't think, very controversial things, besides maybe the fact that we should be, when we're pressed up against this, okay, yes, I want to build something that's healthy. And then the baseline of construction, which is not healthy, but so much less expensive.
Right.
You have decisions to make. And I'm going through a building project now, and it's tough making those decisions, because when you're faced with every single one, and especially as someone that has a good understanding and knowing, I'm not going into this in the dark. Like, I understand that these things are better and that they exist, and some of them are going to be inaccessible. Like, it's really challenging.
Yeah, which ones of them to move away from, which ones to hold on to.
Yeah.
Knowing that they all have impact.
Which ones I'll convince myself, no, I didn't, that shouldn't have been what I was after anyway, so that I can just feel better about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what you had to do. So where does building biology differ from mainstream high performance? Because there's people that have heard high performance building. I think that, again, is a term that is now sort of being used for pretty much everything, which is unfortunate. But where would you see it, those two differing? Kind of where does the high performance building and BBI different? Yeah,
this gets into the whole free range thing, where it's like, what does that actually mean? And is it stipulated in legislation somewhere? Is it just a term? Like, high performance is, like, as far as I know, anyone can call their thing they're building high performance. It's not mandated, or you don't have to prove anything.
Right. Yeah.
Although it can mean very different things, and the way I use it, the way you use it, versus just anyone slapping on the side of a house. So in that way, unfortunately, it becomes like a meaningless term to see when it's just being advertised, but it's also a very important one to discuss.
This is an impossible question to ask you, so I'm curious to see how you do it.
But building biology, I would say, is not, you can do a high-performing home that is also in line with building biology principles, and you can do a home that is not in line with building biology principles that is high performing by how conventional construction presses would classify that term. And where I would say they differ somewhat is I think there is more of an emphasis in high performing buildings that focuses on things that are new and a lot of technology to get to a place that building biology is usually trying to come from a lower tech way first. So if you can solve it through a passive means, that should be our priority, both because of the overall health implications in doing that, but then also things not breaking or going wrong. If it's just the natural way a material is absorbing and releasing moisture, it's going to always do that, right? Nothing's going to stop it from happening. Whereas if you're relying upon a pump to, when the electricity goes out, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Another way I think it differs from a lot of the other organizations that get within the high performance space is that building biology is a set of principles that you apply to design and construction. You do not get buildings certified through the Building Biology Institute in the way that other organizations have certification processes. The Building Biology Institute will certify professionals that you then work with, but the buildings itself are not going through that. And they did that intentionally because they didn't want it to become about their income stream being tied to just going through and having people check off boxes, so that because when you go through that approach, almost inevitably, because buildings are so complex and varied and projects are so varied, that you end up with perverse incentives where you're trying to meet, LEED had been famous for that, where you could put bike racks in and then avoid other things, but no one was biking. So it wasn't it was a well-intending thing that just someone feel like, oh, I can get this certification by doing these really, humans do that. That's just what we do, right? If you only had to do, half the test, you're going to pick the 5 easiest questions from the 10 that are there. And that's just natural. But if you just get rid of the test and say, we're really going to make this about trying to do the best that we can. And if your goal as a client is to do that, you work with someone, you go through the hard choices. You're not going to get all the way there all the time. But what you are going to do is get a lot closer to where you otherwise would have been, and increase this path forward to push the whole industry in a way so that it becomes easier to do the things that are currently difficult with respect to costs, often because they're just not common, or they haven't, there's not enough plastering, right? Which there's not a lot of people that plaster anymore. So plaster is super expensive. It didn't used to be, the same way, because you had a lot of people that knew that craft.
Mm-hmm. So are there parts of the building biology's teachings that are more relevant to our practices than others? So ours being, we're very much aligned on what it is that we want our buildings to do, between how we build them and how you design them. But what are some of the teachings that really align with how we view that?
How we view construction?
Yeah, how we view construction, how we execute construction.
I think, the focus on occupant health, I think, is a big one. The focus on simplicity in a way, so that we're starting from a place. Oh, and because this is one that you talk about all the time, is proven history of use, right? If you send Kevin a new product, whatever it is, he'll dip it in water first. It's no, that's electronic. Doesn't matter. It's going in water, and it'll be sitting outside. It'll be in the wind, but he's gonna beat the crap out of it to just see how it's gonna perform in an extreme situation. Because, and rightly so, if you're gonna put your name or your firm's name on something, and you're gonna clad the house in some material that sounds great and all the specs that the manufacturer has provided, well, ultimately it's not good for anyone if that doesn't hold up well. And so as much as possible, you're relying on things that have been done because you've seen them, and you have a building that's 30 years old where you can go and inspect how it's actually performing. And then when you do something that you don't have that history of use for, you're really diligent about just vetting it to make sure as much as you possibly can that it's going to perform in the way that it's saying it's going to. And that you also have that resiliency of, if it doesn't, what do we do? how do we access it? Is the, you know, can you remove this later without tearing apart everything else in the assembly?
Yeah, no, that's very true. I find that when you push something to the extremes, only then you know what it really is made of. And the extremes will happen at some point.
Which you try to do with me. And
Yeah, and you're here.
I'm still here.
Yeah, exactly.
That is one of the tensions that can develop between, I would say, building science and building biology. Is building science, if it's about efficiency, it's sort of, if your end goal is just to get to certain testing levels, for example, for indoor air tightness or that sort of thing, you can get there in some less than ideal occupant health ways, and also ways that don't hold up over time.
Right.
Where building biology is sort of trying to pull back that curtain and say we need to do both of those things. Yeah.
And I find the testing interesting. Like I get excited to learn about like what metrics building are meeting, but it's just, if that becomes the focus itself, we've missed, we've just like skirted around where we should be, which is ultimately building buildings for people and not for metrics or to get some number lower.
Right. For sure. Another thing too that I would say is that kind of like when you get your blood tested, it's a snapshot in time of what's happening with your blood, right? And the same thing with like when you're doing, blower door testing or pressurizing a house to see where it's, how much is leaking out of it. That's a snapshot in time, because how much it leaks today is going to be very different than how much it leaks 30 years from now or 100 years from now. And so ideally we want it to leak as minimal as possible so that in 100 years it then leaks at an acceptable amount, but we can't wholly focus on that.
Right.
So anyway.
And then just to carry that analogy, like getting blood tested is a tool, and that tool provides information. If you get your blood tested and everything comes off the charts, like you got a problem, right? Like there's some things that need to be done. But just because you're within the normal range of everything that was tested, it doesn't mean that you've then succeeded and never have to do anything else again. Like if the goal is health, the blood test is a tool to give you some information as you try to maintain health. And the blower door test is the same way. Like it gives you information at that moment in time, understand the limitations of it. But if you do the blower door test and you are nowhere close to what you were trying to hit, there's also something there that says, okay, like we might have a pretty large leak somewhere that we got to troubleshoot and figure that out. But it's not about the blower door test, or shouldn't be. And when we get caught up on like, oh, we're just the other building next door was like a little bit lower than it's just all of that is just missing the goal of what those tools I think should be helping us to achieve.
One of the things that comes to mind is a question about what you said about starting with some building blocks when you went to school and then needing to expand on those as you grow in your own career, especially when it comes to healthy homes, for example. Now you're teaching with building biology and pretty deeply involved in it. Are there elements of it that you feel like are high points or things that we really need to pay attention to all the time in our buildings that stand out as you've gone in that path?
The enclosure systems is something I really wish we focused more on in school. Understanding
in architecture
school.
Okay.
Yeah. And I will say, like, the Building Biology Institute does have some affiliations with different universities and wants more. I mean, they want to get their curriculum into schools. And I would be very interested in just generally outside of even that institute, like having more discussions about the principles of building science and how they relate to design, so that architects are not thinking in a vacuum of just designing space. That space has materials that are doing it, and what materials you use to create that space really matters, and the assembly and the order and all of that, and understanding the relationship with humidity, particularly for comfort, and with mold. So that's always, it's just always something we should be considering. Airflow through buildings, like where you want it and where you don't want it, because we want to control like how there's things we want to have vented. There's times when we want to make sure there's not air coming in. The difference between when we're talking about breathing assemblies vapor permeability versus air tightness, and making sure that we never have assemblies that have, if you have an assembly that is vapor closed and not allowing any moisture through, one, you're using it in very specific instances, and you're never having two layers that are trapping moisture, so that you end up with trapping moisture and creating the problems that come from that, whether it's organic or rot or just other building failures. So that's an element that I think could be integrated without losing anything from the design side. And they do that to a certain extent. It's just, I think it could be pushed even further. And would benefit everyone. I mean, the prioritizing health and having that not be in competition with design, because it does not have to be. I think the most beautiful designs are ones that are in tune with their environments and with the places and with the people that they're for. And I think we recognize that when we see those come about. We can also recognize designs that seem very out of touch with everything, and they will a lot of times be very unhealthy. And it's not just because of that, but they just tend to go together.
Right.
Because it's all about forcing things in versus working with the landscape, working with the materials that you have on hand. And traditional architectures have always done that at a necessity. We have the ability not to, but when we choose to import something from a long range, that should be a very intentional act and not the just default one, which is what it's become. We're not even considering how things are getting to our projects anymore. And then the implications of that, both in terms of the supply chains, the health impacts all along the way, the carbon impacts, like there's all of these things that just get ingrained in a default setting of not caring about where things are coming from.
Yeah, but I think that there's some limitations to that, though, because lime plaster isn't manufactured here locally. So we, unfortunately, to use that product, which has so many great health benefits and performance benefits, it has to be brought in from somewhere else.
And that's where I would just say that that's the intentional aspect to me, is like, we've looked around. If we can't find something locally, you then make that decision, but you understand why you're making it, versus it being like, we get wood products from other parts of the world. Like, that's kind of insane. We are surrounded by, other parts of the world, and then using our wood. Like, it is that, like, we can cut that out and get buildings that are, the wood that we have available and used in the right way and designed properly into the assembly will perform very well. And is of this place, and then culturally ties to what we've been using for a long time, but it's also beautiful, and it succeeds in its function without all of the other negative things that would be tied with cutting down rainforests in Africa or Amazon or something like that.
Are there rainforests in Africa?
Not anymore. We're cutting them all down.
Okay, because I thought those were just
for our beautiful
Amazon, but yeah,
ebony.
Right, exactly. So Paula Baker Laporte is a local celebrity in Oregon. For those
period.
Yeah, that's all that needs to be said. No, in the alternative construction.
Did you tell her about this, and she's going to watch this, and so now this was your
No, Bryan, this is all up and
Do you still need to approve your final papers? Is that what this is?
No, I already passed with some of the best scores on record. Yeah. So Paula is a bit of a celebrity in the space of building biology and like alternative construction towards the end of healthy homes. And can you tell us a little bit about her affiliation with the Building Biology Institute, and how long, like what her experience, how long she's been involved in it, and how that interacts with what she does, to your knowledge?
I don't know exactly how long she's been involved in the Institute, but she's certainly instrumental in its maybe its second phase since its foundation of expanding out and particularly approaching the architecture community, which is something that they're increasingly trying to do. I have a ton of respect for Paula. She's been a mentor of mine for years now, and is who I studied with through the process of getting my certification. And she has been, she's written books on healthy home design, worked on so many projects integrating in a lot of these principles that are beautiful and feel truly amazing. Like getting to visit some of those spaces that that we did on our, like when I had done my initial seminar, that were really powerful, and it was a way of like putting into feelings the things that we're trying to learn from textbooks and why this matters. And I think she is now making a real push to get more builders. I mean, because there's a whole range of people that get attracted to the institute, but only some percentage of them are professionals within the built environment. The most recent certification path that she was the one who created was the Building Biology New Construction Certification, which is really geared towards building professionals, architects, designers, engineers that are in the space of creating new structures. And how do we take the building biology principles, make them accessible to all of these professionals that have a ton of knowledge between them all, and yet get them to all come together to focus on this joint goal of making healthy spaces, without losing the training and other things that they bring to it, which is also important, but then that there's this kind of binding principle at play.
I didn't know that she was part of getting or was the architect behind the Building Biology NC certification.
Yeah, instrumental. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah.
I think it was her idea, and she executed it with help from others. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was a big, because of exactly that. She noticed that she's an architect, and she has a renowned architecture practice outside of building biology, and has incorporated these principles because of her own experiences with health, clients that she has that she works with a lot of people with chemical sensitivities and other health conditions, mold exposure, that she was learning how to navigate that, and the building biology principles, which very much are work synergistically with that mindset. So I don't know exactly the order of what all those came about, but as she's doing that and then realizing there's not enough, other architects that are coming through this program, how do we attract them? How do we make this something that, like Paul, you're saying about, like, this isn't in schools. We don't know about the institute doesn't even get mentioned in schools, much less the principles being taught. So right. What avenues do we have to make this something that is more common within the community of designers?
So building biology, from both of your descriptions, is a fairly eclectic mix of people who are drawn to it. How are people drawn to building biology? It seems like a lot of it's their own life experiences. Is that true?
Almost always that's been my case of, it's not everyone, but if you go to one of their seminars, it is very common that the person that's there has had some significant health related, often caused by buildings, but even if it's not, they've learned through just their experiences that they can't be in a lot of spaces, and now they want a space to live. So it's a lot of people who are building or designing their own homes. They're just desperate for figuring out, how do I make sure, because I'm going to put all my savings into this, that I can exist there comfortably in a healthy way after it's complete. And this appeals to them for that reason. Yeah,
and that's probably not dissimilar from people who find themselves sick in any which way, whether it's a friend of mine whose children or a son has autism, and so they end up down a rabbit hole and end up there with a bunch of other people who have the same sort of life experiences and are comparing notes, and so that sort of thing. There aren't very many builders in the Building Biology Institute at this point, generally speaking, right?
Well, I mean, to my knowledge, no. I mean, my exposure is only, the seminar that I attended in person. And there was another builder there, but was a commercial, remodeler. And so he was not really a residential builder. And I'm not and he was kind of at the end of his career. I'm not sure if he was looking at this to do consulting or what. I don't really remember. But no, it was mostly people that had experienced issues and they wanted to fix their own problems, or they were passionate about the program, but almost all of them had some sort of injury that had happened to them through their house or whatever that started them down the path.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I mean, behind the scenes, Kevin's been intimidating other builders from getting into this space, which I wish you would stop.
Keep doing,
Yeah,
keep
even
doing,
though,
to separate the wheat from the chaff. Okay.
no, there hasn't been a ton. And I think they're starting to get a little more, but I would love for more people to go through that program.
It's a long and deep study to be able to understand principles that undergird this, both from a building science perspective and also from the health perspective. And so it makes sense to me why it wouldn't be more broadly adopted yet. I think it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is too. But, when you get away from mainstream thinking, it becomes really difficult because Bryan alluded to this a little bit earlier. But when we seek out these natural different building materials, they don't carry them at Home Depot. They don't carry them at the local lumber yard.
Well, you don't even know this because you won't go into Home Depot to look.
Yes, I will, Bryan.
Will you?
You just got unendorsed.
Yeah.
Oh.
But because of that, it makes it difficult from the start. From the start, if you want to use lime plaster and stuff, Bryan has experienced this. How many places locally carry lime plaster in a usable quantity for a whole house in Portland?
2.
The answer is 0.
Okay.
0, Bryan. The answer is 0. You failed that.
Oh, man.
Yeah. No, but the answer is
Luckily, yeah.
the answer is 0. There's a local company that carries a small amount of very fine plaster, Venetian plaster finishes, like to do a accent wall or one room of your house, or whatever. But to carry the plaster and the lime plaster and the amounts that you need to do an entire house around here, there's no place that carries it. So we had to import some stuff from the East Coast where there's plenty of it. And so that right there makes the process difficult and gets a lot of people to be like this isn't a repeatable thing for me, so I'm going to go back to doing things mainstream because that's easy. And I understand that. But we believe in it so wholeheartedly that it's worth the extra effort to get these things to happen here. And we've had conversations about, gosh, maybe we should become a supply house for these things for our own use, and then sell them also as an additional source of income, because they're so hard to get. But if you can bring it over in big, semi-truck loads, then the shipping cost is spread out amongst, and it's not quite so hard to bear. But, we've also experienced this with foamed glass aggregate that we would love to put on our projects because it's phenomenal. However, we can't get it here at a halfway reasonable cost because of the shipping costs from the East Coast to here makes it, pretty unattainable for us currently.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I believe that the industry demand for those things will become strong enough that there will be people that will want to have plants out here on the West Coast, which will help make it affordable, but it takes time for that to happen. And a lot of people don't want to sit around and wait for that time. We're in a world of instant gratification. They would just want things to happen fast. And if they don't happen fast, they move on to something else. So I think that's an uphill battle, and that's why a lot of builders aren't looking that direction. And it's also the same thing with straw bale construction. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's a really difficult thing to turn into a mainstream process. And I think that, we have to recognize that we need to build homes that are repeatable and in a way that they don't seem so fringe to people, right? And when you tell a layperson that we're going to build your house out of straw, they conjure up images of the 3 little pigs and the wind blowing the house down. Because really, you're taking somebody that doesn't know the industry and you're saying we're going to use a straw house, and they're like, that's crazy. And all these things go through their head. And so, there's a component of getting buy-in to what we're doing by using some repeatable processes that give people a house that looks a lot like a house that they're used to seeing what a house looks like.
Well, just so everyone knows out there, we can build with straw and we can do it well. I do hear your point, both in terms of the accessibility of materials, which the only way I know to combat that is just slowly push. You get one thing on a project that you had to spend a little more money on, where none of us are going to be able to do all of it. We can't, fight the industry by ourselves. I think eventually these things will become, just driven by that desire. Within building biology, and one of the things I like about the fact that the buildings are not getting certified, but you're teaching a set of principles, is that we're incentivized to do the best that we can, not meet some certain metrics. So even if you can't get the foam glass gravel, and we use in a construction practice that is standard for the area because that's what's available and we know will still work well, we can, in every other way that we are able to, within the means that we have, approach through those same principles to get as close as we can, and then be successful in that space because of that. And then the next time when it is available, you now have more options available to you that you can reconsider that one practice. And yeah, it's just going to take us, I think, doing it.
Yeah, repeatedly.
Yeah.
And also training crafts people to work with these materials and with enough repetitions that it becomes easy for them.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the economics of it get tricky, right? If you have to teach your crew to do anything different and it's only the one time, either that person's got to be able to pay for, because there's a lot of training that's going on and you're going to, all that cost go to that one project. Or if they see things changing and they say, okay, we're going to lose money on this job, but then we're going to be the ones that have this ability to do things because we see all these projects that want this, and then they can make it all back that way. Someone can, make a rational business decision in that space. But if they don't see that being the case, like, you either got to be, wealthy enough that you can afford to do that one thing that's helping that project. Maybe it's not helping the whole industry. And what we ultimately want to get to is moving these practices so that we have the ability, and others do too. And when you stop intimidating the other builders and they become building biologists, like, they are also able to take on, the access those same subcontractors and craftspeople to do the things that we're advocating for in terms of construction practices.
Yeah, you mentioned needing to have projects that are demanding these things, right? That's sort of the area of our greatest exploration now together as teams, and wanting to bring that to Portland. We hear a lot, maybe too much these days, about net zero, for example. People maybe are familiar with passive house. I don't know a whole heck of a lot of people who would say they know what building biology is, even though people are more and more fixated on their health in certain ways, or they're seeing down certain sight lines anyway. So it is a really interesting thing for us to try to figure out what it means to, without leading people by fear mongering, or your house is going to make you sick, or that sort of thing, to generate interest and forward motion in these areas.
Because, if someone comes to me or comes to you and says, I found you through the Building Biology Institute, like, that's awesome. Like, we have a starting point that there's a certain set of values that we're already agreeing on, and like, we can move to the next thing knowing that there's an alignment there. If they don't, and they're interested in a healthy space, I'm still going to talk about building biology principles. It's not going to cost them any more. Again, the building's not getting certified. There's I've already paid for my certification. So like, all of that's there. I'm going to talk about these principles and do it in a way that is saying that I think this is best for you and this project, and it has all of these other benefits. I think it's better for it's the built environment. It's the ecological environment. It's the health of all the people that are involved in the whole process. This is another conversation we've had a lot. It's like how to make construction sites more healthy for the people that are working in them, which is an ethical issue that should also be tied to the choices it is tied to the choices that we're making in selecting materials. And all of those conversations are going to have, and hopefully someone will resonate with those. And if they're coming because of a health, like they have an acute health problem. I mean, like you said, like if someone or their child has an acute condition or health problem, that is going to be their focus.
Correct.
And it makes sense why that is. And for everyone else, though, it's the same things are like, just because you're not as susceptible to formaldehyde off-gassing as somebody else, it's still not good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it may be a little bit of a harder sell with them versus someone that knows, like, I can't step into a space that has any like my tolerance is really low. I'm recovering from this thing and my body just, like, it's going to take me years, but I have to be in this space that built to a certain standard. That makes it easier in a sense from the design side, because we don't have those conversations anymore. But it's the same things that are going into it. Like, we're still trying to remove things that we know are bad for us, regardless of who it's for.
Yeah. Sick building syndrome. Are you familiar with this?
Actually, no, because I don't make sick buildings. Tell me about it.
Do you live in one?
I do live in one. Unfortunately.
So do as I do, not as I say.
Yeah.
Right? Or do as I say.
He didn't
not as I
design
do.
his building,
Yeah.
though, Kevin.
I'm building healthy buildings. But I wanted to understand what my clients are going through.
There you
So,
go.
yeah.
So it's research. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. No, I watched a podcast. This is the beginning of it this morning, where there's two doctors that are really pushing into the building syndrome and testing and stuff. And some of what they're determining or figuring out is that a lot of the antimicrobial paint additives and stuff are causing that, because the sort of the weak bugs are easily killed by that, and then the really hardy, horrible, ugly ones are not. And if the weak ones do survive, it emboldens them to be stronger and sort of mutate to be more catastrophic because of that thing, you know. And you think about how many products that are going into homes today have the label on there with, you know, like some sort of antimicrobial agent put into it. And it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, building biology specifically advises against any of those types of products that are not that you shouldn't be concerned with microbial growth in your home, but the way that you deal with it is through making sure the humidity is outside of certain ranges and making sure that the surfaces that you're using can be properly cleaned and things like that, but not trying to do it through, especially in like the paints or
right. It's interior paint, exterior paint. And I think that a lot of people don't even recognize that they're there.
It's a weird, I mean, again, as humans, we like to approach things this way. All right, so there's like something's happening that's causing, like we're getting mold in the paint.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not look at why that's happening.
Right.
Let's just add a chemical to it so that the mold can't grow there.
Right.
As if, one, you haven't solved the real issue, which is the fact that if you have the climate for mold to grow in your house, even if it's not growing on the paint anymore because you've put something toxic in it, it's growing someplace else and it's still going to make you sick.
Right.
And now you've instituted this other variable which has been designed to kill this certain kind of life, and maybe it affects you in some way too. Like, you don't know. And it's also, it's combined with so many other things that it always gets hard to trace something back to something specific, but it is exactly the type of thinking that is against the precautionary principle, right? Where we don't know how this is going to, like, we've tested it on mold in the lab. It kills the mold. We don't know anything else. Now we're going to test it on you.
Right.
And I don't want to be the one tested on, and I don't want to be the one that's speccing things that other people are going to be testing on.
Well, I'd rather you be tested than me, just to work.
You know, that even if that's true, I don't want either of those. And I wouldn't be able to sleep even if I knew you were being tested on.
That's right.
And
wow.
And my stress level and my sleep, which are both things that are tied to my health. So it all comes back to healthy living means I can't be speccing, antimicrobial paints that are, we're just going to see how it works out. And, if you've listened to this podcast, specifically, these doctors are probably referring to, they have data and evidence now that are speaking to this exact thing. But it just always comes back to me. It's like, I didn't need that. I didn't need that data to get to the same place. And not that it's bad that we have it if we can use it to then convince other people, but like, let's start. I mean, same with food. Like, let's not spray stuff on it as the default. Let's start with if there's a pest, why? Is it like, what is it that's creating that condition that is not good, and figure out how we can avoid that so that it without just, putting the toxic thing on top.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I mean, you solve one problem and then you add 2 new ones.
Yeah, and you don't know what those are until you discover them later, and
yeah, exactly.
It's too late. Now you have some disease that maybe it was tied to that, maybe it wasn't, but we've made so many of these poor decisions over the course of
I mean, it's very obvious. Like in the pharmaceutical world, I have an uncle that just had a bit of a health scare with his heart, and so the doctors prescribed him 9 different pills. And he's like, Kevin, I researched them, and they all have side effects that are worse than the original condition. So he's like, that doesn't seem to make sense. But it's like, they solved that problem. They just added, 3 others somewhere else.
Yeah. So let's not do that in our pill taking or in our product specifications.
Exactly. So how has your knowledge of the Building Biology Institute's teachings made you a better architect?
I think because I have a better understanding of what contributes to positively and negatively to human health, I'm able to better serve the people that I'm working with to create, whether they're asking for it or not, spaces that are going to make them healthier when they sell the house. It'll make, the next people healthier. It will prioritize longevity too, because we're using systems that we know are proven to work, which, the less waste that's involved with having to redo things or changing things out because they've failed. Like, that's also a good thing. We've really focused on speccing and finding, just understanding the range of materials that often have a large history of use that have gone out of fashion because they're not the newest thing, and how to incorporate them again into buildings in ways that, again, understanding how they're working all together. But from an environmental perspective, we can use things that are local materials that are sustainably harvested and are naturally produced, that have, I think, a lot of other cyclical benefits to them in our society as well as in the individual projects that we're working on.
One of the things that we're constantly playing with the balances of how much do we try to describe or get into the weeds with clients about particular details of, let's say, our building materials or how we put them together or that sort of thing. And there are times that we feel like our better approach is to probably not open that discussion at all, just do that practice. And there are other times that because it's far enough off the beaten path or the cost implications are high enough, we have to open that conversation to them. I'm sure the same thing comes into play at times for you, where when you're dealing with the design of a project for a client, there are certain parts of your understanding that you've gained from building biology and building science that you specifically talk to them about, and there are probably others that are baked into the cake, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think it is true. I would err on the side as, like, I love getting to explain to people why we're wanting to use something, what options that we have, and why we're using them. Ideally, for me, like, I would be at a place, which is where I'm working towards in terms of a business and a practice, where the baseline of what we're doing is established as something that I already feel comfortable with. So we're building a wall system this way. If you want to have the discussion as to why we're doing it, that's great. Let's have it. If, the cost of this building is, we're really concerned about it, I'm still not going to lower that wall assembly, but then let's not have the 3-hour talk about this material right here and do a bunch of, do a bunch of extra research, which I'm happy to do, but I've already done a lot. And I know that this one works really well in this area and we've used it before. So we know, where to spec it. We know who's going to do the install. Like, all of those things have been figured out. And that's part of, like, if we're talking about the economy of building, redoing that every time doesn't make sense from a cost perspective. But also, even if you're getting to the same point and you're having to explain things all along the way, which, again, happy to do it, but you as the client gotta be happy to pay me for that. Or say you vetted me, you vetted the builder, and say, we're going to get you to this space. We're going to make sure this building is healthy and it's sustainable and it's durable. And this is the assembly that we're using to do that. And now because we've cut out all of this time, I mean, the time is what ends up costing a lot, whether it's design, it's management, it's install, like the hours are expensive. And making sure that we have a good starting point is where I'd like to be, and I'm always happy to advocate, but that can happen in other ways too. It doesn't have to be with individual clients. Like this is a form of doing that, right? Which people can listen to this. I mean, that's part of why you're doing this podcast. Is that we could steer them to this, and then they don't have to, take me aside one-on-one to have that same conversation about something, which then I have to figure out how to make sure it's working into the whole business scheme that is, I want to be focused on the design and executing buildings, and I don't want your project to get cut because we spent too much time, researching things that I already knew of a really good place. Not that you can't always improve and do better, but we're going to try to do that thoughtfully in specific ways for projects that we're working on, and find one or two things that this is where we're going to push this time, and that's built into our fee structure. But we're not reinventing just our own wheel of what this form of building can be.
Yeah. So Bryan, you're familiar with the concept of string cheese, right?
Just depends on what the follow-up is, because that's a weird first question.
So you eat string cheese?
I don't eat string cheese anymore.
Oh, anymore?
No, I used to love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. And
they're less stringy than they used to be. I'm convinced.
Kevin, that's already leaning. That answer's already leaning in the direction.
It is.
You might want to
abort. I'm going to abort, and we'll ask somebody else that is probably going to answer the way I want them
correctly.
to. Yep. So back when it was more stringy, did you find that to be problematic because you just bite it like a normal cheese, or
no?
Do you peel it apart?
I strung, yeah.
And so you revealed the filaments akin to human hair, and that's what you enjoyed eating.
I would never eat it unless it was translucent. So it had to be thin enough that I could hold it up to the light to know.
You asked precisely the wrong human being.
That's true, too. It was super weird, but I would spend a long time breaking that cheese apart, and which is how I know that they changed, because my skill set in stringing did not decrease. I'm positive about that.
Bryan, you are correct.
I also don't know where this is supposed to go.
Bryan, you are 100% correct in your analysis.
No,
that's
Bryan,
all we need to know.
Every bit of that answer was creepy. And we're probably gonna
it started creepy. It finished creepy.
Put a warning label on this podcast. Because of that.
There was no segue to that. It was just out of the blue.
I think he's just hungry. Is it lunchtime?
All right, so we're gonna hit you with 5 quick fire questions.
Okay, that have to do with string cheese.
They have nothing to do with string
No.
cheese. And the idea is that you're gonna give a fairly short answer.
I'm not good at that. But
We clearly recognize that, which is why I was saying.
But seriously, the string cheese has nothing to do with anything?
No,
it's
just Kevin thinks it's weird that I string cheese.
As opposed to just eat it.
Oh, okay. So this was just, you talked about this before.
We've talked about it many times.
Yeah, many
In fact,
times.
Mike knows this conversation as well.
It's called string cheese because that's the way it's what you're supposed to do and what the thing is.
No, it's called string cheese because it has a stringy nature to it, but most people pick
less
up and
stringy
eat
than
it,
it used to be, but
eat it just like any other cheese.
Most people build buildings wrong. Most people eat string cheese wrong. It doesn't justify.
No, we don't eat string cheese wrong. Look, let me give you an example. My 3-year-old grandson, right? He has no dog in the fight. You give him string cheese, he bites it and eats it just like...
Well, because his grandfather has been teaching him wrong, which is
No.
what your only
absolutely.
job is to your...
No, I didn't teach him how to do it. He developed that on his own.
I think Paul needs to take a visit.
For sure.
Yeah.
No. You guys are weird.
Child protectors.
Weird. You know how long it takes to peel each individual
I
strand
spent
off
probably
there?
30 minutes doing it. Yes.
Oh,
Wow.
boy.
All of recess. If I could.
Ask him the dang rapid fire questions. You save yourself from this misery.
Okay. What led you down the path of building biology?
I was looking for certification processes when I started my practice, and this was one of the ones that I settled on specifically because of its focus on human health.
Whoa.
That was fast.
Yeah, he talked faster even.
Yeah, dang. That's impressive.
They're not all going to be that way.
No, they're not. It'd be like mini part questions.
Did that bang come through, by the way?
It did,
Good.
yeah. It was,
Nice.
yeah. The whole effect was there. We know how close you are, or how close you've become with Paula Baker Laporte. The question is, what does she see in you that we're missing?
That's a question for Paula.
Can you speculate?
I think it's my sense of humor, mostly, honestly. I mean, if I'm going to answer that question seriously, I hope that Paula sees in me someone that wants to carry on a lot of what she's already started from a design standpoint, because I am trained as an architect, and there's not a lot of people that have gotten to building biology that are in that space, which is what she is. That there's, and that's what I mean, one of the things I look to Paula for is the fact that if she wasn't part of the Institute, it would have been a lot harder for me to get there, only because I don't see, it's like you don't see anyone else that is of the same place. Like, wait, so this isn't for architects. Like, this isn't to be taken seriously. Yeah. Like, she is a very respected and renowned architect, independent of anything else with the Building Biology Institute. And so it gives it a certain credibility to someone like me that is in that space already and has helped me then get to where now I can look at what is being discussed and offered, and then, which is what I've done, decided for myself, like, this has a lot of validity to it. I like what these principles are, and I want to be a part of, furthering that on.
That was a long answer.
I can't get them all.
Yeah. What would you like people to know about you that many don't?
Nothing. I don't like talking about myself.
No, I think we need, we need an answer to that question, Bryan, before we can move on to the next one.
It's a true answer, though.
Yeah. We want false answers here.
Well, I mean,
so something that people don't know about me that I want them to know about me.
Yeah.
But wait a second. They know what I want them to know, I think. Don't they? No.
No.
Is this something you want to know about me? Oh, yes. Okay.
We want to know about you. Yeah.
Besides your address, which I
is-
found out.
You haven't told Kevin yet, have you?
No, I haven't.
No, he's kept it a secret.
I'm going to deflect and say that when I walk to their office, I have to take multiple paths so that they can't predict which way I'm coming from, and use that to pinpoint my
Triangulate your location.
Okay, so I think the answer to that question is you're weird.
A short question, a short answer, a long answer, and a non-answer.
Yeah.
So what else can I come up with for these last two?
I'm not sure. So what do you say to people that think chemical sensitivity is fake?
People.
Yeah, there's plenty of people that think it's fake.
Well, it's
And that it's
not.
all in your
It's I mean, it's not that there are not things that people can have things that are in their head. Multiple chemical sensitivities is a very real thing. It often happens, and I think why this persists is that people will be unable to process in their body levels of toxins that most people have no trouble with because of usually a overexposure. And so someone who hasn't gone through that, it's going to be very hard for them to understand it because they walk into space and it feels fine to them. We also do acclimate to things even that are unhealthy to us. I notice, like, for instance, the laundry detergent that my parents have used our whole life. Like,
what brand is that?
I don't want to lose your next sponsorship, so I'll not say it here. But like, really bothers me since I've switched to something that was intentional and healthy. And it didn't bother me before. It's not that it was ever good for me, and it's not good for them. And I think they're in the process of switching. Maybe they'll watch this and finally. But so there's that aspect of it too. But I mean, if you think it's not real and you're not dealing with it, just leave the other people to like go on their path for healing and just not obstruct them. I don't know. Like, I'm not going to convince everyone of everything. I hope it never happens to them, but unfortunately sometimes that's the way, humans, when we are faced with something, like, oh, now I understand it. And with
A lot of the time.
we got to get beyond that though, and just like validate people's experiences. And even if it was true that with one specific person it was in their head, there's still something that needs to be dealt with, and the way to deal with that is not by just telling them it doesn't matter, it's all in your head. Like, that's not how you solve a mental condition either. It's not helpful. So I would tell them they're not being helpful. That's my answer.
Okay.
The rest of it was not part of the answer. It was the prelude to the answer, which was very short, and that it's not helpful.
Okay. Well, I think like following that, your answer to that question, then I would say that the way you used to eat string cheese is normal.
At the time, it seemed very normal.
Yes.
No one I got made fun of for other things, but the string cheese eating was fine.
Last question. We'll see how you do with this one.
Also, is this a thing now? There's always going to be 5 rapid fire questions?
Yeah. That's our new thing we're doing. Yeah.
Always 5.
It's cutting edge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Might be 6 next time.
Okay, so that's what I was...
You're going to be prepared for 5, and then we're going to hit you with 6.
Or 3.
And that's going to throw you off. Yeah, or 3 or whatever. It'll be an odd number. How about that?
Okay, good.
Dowsing rods, real or a hoax?
Why is this the last question?
Because it's an important one.
Is it an important one?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, is it an important one?
We determine what's important.
Me speaking as myself, not a member of the Building Biology Institute, I have looked into the science of dowsing rods. I don't think they're real. The practice of, like, you talking specifically with finding water?
Yeah, I mean I think that's the most common one.
The practice of using so just what I think is that somebody can be very attuned and knowledgeable about a place and about the conditions that would be needed to find a good spot to place, to drill for a well, for instance. And they can have a dowsing rod as their method of doing that may not be tied to that specific thing at all. They can still, however, be a lot better at finding where that spot is than most other people would. So it's like, it can be a valid way to approach something. I certainly don't think there's harm in doing it, but I don't think it comes down to there being something about the specific tool that they're saying is creating that. I think if they're good at their craft, it's coming from them understanding like how the land works and just the place, and that's been instituted in all sorts of different forms of cultures for a really long time, where it's like going back to shamans that like they are getting better results than just would be random, but I don't think it usually ties to what maybe the superstition around it is claiming it to be.
So I'm going to tell you a story. That was a long answer, by the way.
Was that the right answer though? Or
there is not a right or wrong answer.
Well, what is the story going to be?
So
it sounds like it was the wrong answer. And now you're going to tell me.
No, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just going to tell you this story. So earlier in my career, I worked with a well driller that used dowsing rods. And he was an older guy. And he's like, Kevin, he goes, this is the way I can determine where water is. And that's here in the Willamette Valley. And I'm like, okay, I was kind of skeptical, but kind of like sort of open to it. And he gets out these dowsing rods, and before he starts, he goes, and just so you know, like this area that we're drilling in is known for having like areas of good water and then a few inches over like no water. And I'm like, okay, I don't know any different than that. And he gets out his dowsing rods, and he was doing it for a while, and he's like, okay, right here, look. And then his rods they're metal ones, and they go together, and he's like, yep, right here is it, and I'm going to mark it. He goes, and if you don't believe me, look, I'll do it again, and look, it's pointing to the same thing. I'm like, okay. So he drills there's water. And I'm like, wow, there's something to this. So next project, we need to drill a well, different well driller, gets in a little bit of a different area. And I say, he's like, where do you want the well? And I'm like, what do you mean, where do I want the well? Like, you have to find out where. And he's like, Kevin, there's water everywhere underneath us. Just tell me where you want the well and I'll drill it and there'll be water there. I'm like, okay. Drills a well, there's water there. And then the next project, same thing. No dowsing rod. The guy's like, where do you want the well? I'm like, well, it'd be really close if it was right by the garage there. Great. Drills it and there's water.
Are there still water in all of them?
Yes. The point is, it was a bit of a gimmick, I believe, because here in the valley, pretty much anywhere you drill, you're going to encounter groundwater.
You just got to go deeper and deeper until you.
Well, I mean, there is
Yeah,
the depth thing is, specific to the site, but yeah. So anyway, so I think it was a bit of a gimmick.
So I got the right answer then, according to your fable.
I don't know if, again, it was a right or wrong answer. It was just that I think that the dowsing rod thing could have some validity to it in some realm, but probably very much like the Ouija board you probably played with as a kid. Like, you moved the thing around.
I was usually doing that while I was stringing the bees with one hand. But yeah, and of course, in a situation where there's water everywhere, you're always going to be right. That's not always the case, and there are places where there's not water everywhere, and understanding the land.
Is that how it was in West Virginia?
It was Virginia. There's coal everywhere.
Is there?
Just go down deep enough. You find
Exactly.
coal. Yeah.
Well, Brian, I think we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For
Always.
episode number 9.
Thank you for joining us on our episode today. We had a lot of fun talking with our guests. We really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be looking forward to you when our next content comes out.